Darkness enveloped me like a venomous whisper, every corner of this opulent boardroom reeking of power and betrayal. I sat there, heart pounding, my eyes straining to conceal the storm raging within. They were watching those who once hailed me as a genius, now staring as if I were a secret about to shatter. One mistake, a single moment of carelessness, had reduced my empire to ashes. A voice cut through from afar, icy and sharp, dragging me back to reality. "You've gone too far," I smiled. But inside, fear choked every shred of hope. That secret, buried deep, had clawed its way back, sharp as a blade. Could I manipulate my way out one last time? Or was this my final reckoning? The day I met Daniel Hart was the day I planted the seeds of my own downfall. It happened at a lavish charity gala hosted by one of America's biggest television networks. The event glittered with crystal chandeliers, murmurs of multi-million-dollar deals floating through the air, alongside the faint scent of expensive cologne and premium champagne. As a veteran reality TV director, I had seen countless hopeful newcomers rise and fall, mostly fall, but something about this night felt distinctly different. For years, I'd been known as the genius behind Survival Quest, the country's top-rated survival reality show. It was my brainchild, harsh, controversial, and dangerously addictive. My name, Vincent Reed, had become synonymous with ruthless precision and impeccable storytelling. Yet beneath my polished exterior, I always knew how fragile this power was. In our world, popularity was fleeting, and I was always searching for fresh talent to keep the show one step ahead. That's when I first laid eyes on Daniel Hart. Across the crowded ballroom, Daniel was already the center of attention, holding court effortlessly with producers, executives, and actors alike. Only 33 and already branded the industry's hottest prodigy. Daniel was known for his daring and boundary-pushing directorial style. His shows weren't just popular, they dominated the ratings, and the media loved his youthful arrogance almost as much as audiences loved his innovative ideas. I felt an instinctive tightening in my chest, part admiration, part jealousy as I watched him charm the entire room. I reminded myself that I'd invited Daniel here. After all, he was supposed to be my latest recruit, a strategic choice to reinforce my show's edge. But now, as I observed the way everyone gravitated toward him, I wondered if I had made a miscalculation. "Vincent Reed," Daniel's voice broke into my thoughts, smooth yet with an unmistakable undertone of challenge. I turned around, hiding my surprise at how quickly he'd reached my side. He offered his hand confidently, an amused sparkle in his eye. "The man himself. I've studied your work extensively." "Studied," I echoed, keeping my voice casual. "I wasn't aware my work required studying." He laughed lightly, but his eyes never softened. "Well, it pays to know your competition." The word landed between us heavily, deliberately placed, and a wave of tension tightened the air around us. For a moment, neither of us spoke. It was a clear, deliberate message. Daniel wasn't here to be my apprentice or my subordinate. He was here to replace me. "I look forward to seeing if you're as good as they say," I finally said, forcing a smile, hoping it looked more natural than it felt. Daniel leaned in closer, lowering his voice just enough so only I could hear. "Trust me, Vincent, I'm better." Before I could respond, Daniel turned gracefully away, returning smoothly to the group of executives who watched our exchange with thinly disguised curiosity. My pulse quickened, a dark thrill racing down my spine. In all my years, I'd never faced someone so brazenly confident, so openly provocative. Stepping back into the shadows, I took a slow sip of champagne and calmly pulled out my phone, pretending to check messages. Instead, I opened a new note and typed Daniel's name, followed by a simple, chilling reminder to myself. Watch closely. Threat level extremely high. As I slid the phone back into my pocket, I felt my smile grow cold. The stakes had just risen exponentially, and so had my determination. If Daniel Hart wanted a war, he had just found his opponent. Over the following weeks, subtle shifts began to surface, minor tremors that hinted at a greater upheaval on the horizon. As director and creative mastermind behind Survival Quest, America's most watched survival reality series, I'd long become accustomed to holding the reins firmly. The show was brutal yet mesmerizing, each episode pushing contestants to their psychological and physical limits in environments designed explicitly to captivate viewers. It wasn't simply entertainment, it was a cultural phenomenon, and my reputation, built meticulously over 2 decades, depended heavily on its ongoing dominance. But recently, a certain episode, directed entirely by Daniel Hart, had shattered every rating record in our show's history. Social media exploded with hashtags praising Daniel's creativity and daring vision, crediting him for revitalizing a format some had begun calling stale. Each tweet, each comment felt like another tiny pinprick in my carefully maintained composure. This growing unease reached its peak at our weekly producers' meeting. The expansive conference room hummed with cheerful conversations about Daniel's remarkable episode, an audacious underwater survival challenge that had captivated millions. Seated directly across from me, Daniel accepted compliments graciously, a perfect picture of modesty. Jonathan Wells, the senior producer who rarely praised anyone, rose and lifted his glass toward Daniel with an almost paternal pride. Before we dive into this week's business, let me just say, Jonathan began, eyes twinkling as he glanced warmly toward Daniel. I haven't seen ratings like these since Vincent first took over this show nearly 20 years ago. Daniel, you're reminding us all what real innovation looks like. The compliment was sincere, but it struck a nerve. The room fell silent briefly, all eyes darting instinctively between Daniel and myself. I felt heat creeping up my neck, but I didn't flinch. Jonathan realized his slip immediately, his smile faltering slightly as he caught my steady gaze. Of course, he added quickly, attempting to smooth over the unintended comparison. No one could ever truly replace Vincent. We all know that. I forced a polite smile, nodding lightly, pretending I hadn't just felt the sting of being openly compared almost unfavorably to my younger rival. But Daniel met my eyes knowingly, the slightest tilt at the corner of his mouth betraying his satisfaction. He understood exactly what had just transpired, relishing every second of this subtle public victory. As the meeting concluded, Daniel lingered intentionally until most had left, casually straightening his impeccable blazer. Approaching me slowly, his tone was smooth yet edged with subtle provocation. Jonathan certainly has a way with words, he remarked lightly, eyes sharp as he studied my reaction. I'm sure he meant nothing by it. Vincent. Of course, I replied, matching his calm demeanor. Jonathan's just sentimental. Ratings come and go. Daniel's smile widened slightly, eyes gleaming with restrained triumph. Maybe, but legacies don't last forever. Change is inevitable, isn't it? Without waiting for my reply, he walked calmly out the door, leaving me standing alone in the silence of the empty room. My pulse hammered steadily at my temples, anger and anxiety tightly controlled beneath my composed exterior. Later that night, sitting alone at my home office, my laptop illuminated the shadows around me. The glow cast a pale, ghostly reflection across my tired face as I typed Daniel Hart's name into the search bar, determinedly pressing enter. Page after page of articles flashed across the screen. Awards, glowing reviews, endless praise. My eyes narrowed as I continued scrolling, determined now to uncover something deeper, something Daniel Hart might desperately want to keep hidden. In the weeks following Daniel's growing acclaim, it became undeniably clear that my grip on Survival Quest was loosening. For nearly 2 decades, I had been the chief creative director, the visionary behind every groundbreaking concept that made our survival reality show a nationwide obsession. The gala that evening wasn't just another glittering ceremony. It was a vital industry event, the place where networks showcased their brightest talent, cemented their legacies, and determined their futures. Tonight, however, felt as if the entire industry had decided my future was suddenly irrelevant. I watched uneasily from my carefully selected table as Daniel Hart effortlessly worked the ballroom, charming executives and winning allies at a dizzying pace. He had the sort of magnetism that couldn't be taught, and it unsettled me deeply, but nothing compared to the sting that came moments later. Jonathan Wells stood proudly on stage, announcing the recipient of the network's prestigious Creative Achievement Award, an honor historically reserved for legends in our field. This year, Jonathan's voice echoed confidently, the award goes to a brilliant mind who has pushed our flagship show beyond every imaginable boundary. Ladies and gentlemen, Daniel Hart. A wave of thunderous applause erupted around me, shaking the very air I breathed. My jaw tightened, my pulse quickening dangerously. Daniel walked toward the stage gracefully, the embodiment of self-assurance, each step stabbing at my pride. He accepted the award with practiced modesty, turning directly to me, eyes glinting knowingly under the bright lights. Vincent Reed set the standard. Daniel began smoothly, his gaze locked onto mine. He defined an era, but now, it's our job, my job, to redefine it. His words lingered intentionally, weighted with unmistakable challenge. The room's applause surged again, but I barely heard it. Daniel knew exactly what he was doing. He'd publicly signaled that the show belonged to him now. After the gala, guests mingled under crystal chandeliers, laughing, congratulating, oblivious to my simmering fury. I stood at the edge of the crowd, carefully controlling my breathing, when Daniel approached casually, a sly smile on his face. "You look troubled, Vincent," he murmured softly, sipping his champagne. "Something bothering you?" "Not at all," I replied, forcing a neutral expression. "Just reflecting on how quickly things can change." He leaned in slightly closer, lowering his voice to ensure only I could hear. "Change is inevitable. Fighting it only speeds up the process. But you know that already, don't you?" His eyes held mine steadily, the dangerous gleam unmistakable. He knew my intentions, or at least strongly suspected them, and was openly daring me to act. The challenge was clear, electric, personal. "You think you understand this industry," I responded calmly, keeping my voice carefully measured. "But understanding takes experience you don't yet have. Watch yourself, Daniel." He chuckled softly, utterly unbothered. Oh, I'm watching carefully, trust me. With that, Daniel turned away, slipping back into the throng of admirers. His words echoed disturbingly in my mind. Returning home that night, my mind raced relentlessly, replaying our exchange. The game had escalated dangerously, and Daniel had openly declared himself a player. Later, in the quiet solitude of my home office, I opened a file I'd started days earlier, a detailed profile of Daniel Hart. Scanning through my notes, I realized I'd gathered plenty of strengths, plenty of achievements, but nothing substantial yet on his weaknesses. Opening a new window on my screen, fingers hovering over the keyboard, I typed carefully Daniel Hart, vulnerabilities. I paused, feeling a chill run through me. To win this battle, I needed more than clever plans. I needed leverage. Everyone had secrets, flaws hidden behind their polished facades. Finding Daniel's would be my first priority, and once discovered, I would exploit it mercilessly. This wasn't merely about survival anymore, it was war. In the days following the gala, the entire production of Survival Quest seemed gripped by an invisible, unspoken tension. Despite Daniel's recent triumph, my position as chief creative director remained largely untouchable, built upon decades of reputation, influence, and connections. Yet, subtle pressure from the network executives was becoming increasingly apparent. Hints and careful suggestions about adopting Daniel's ideas more aggressively, as if the show's future suddenly hinged entirely on his vision. Though my authority remained intact for now, the growing influence of my young competitor was impossible to ignore. Late one afternoon, I stepped from my office, navigating the bustling hallway of our production facility. Employees nodded respectfully as I passed, though their usual enthusiasm seemed tempered with cautious unease. Approaching the elevator, I saw Daniel standing at its entrance, surrounded by a small group of junior producers hanging eagerly on his every word. He turned slightly, noticing my approach, and smiled politely. "Ah, Vincent," he called out, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Perfect timing. I was just telling our team here about your incredible legacy. It must be hard, seeing your work slowly transformed by younger hands." His words hung in the air, sharp and clear. The hallway fell briefly silent, everyone watching closely. Daniel's eyes locked onto mine, a glint of calculated challenge beneath his pleasant expression. I forced a casual smile, meeting his gaze evenly. "Change is inevitable," I responded smoothly. "But it often reveals who's truly prepared and who's merely ambitious." And the junior producers exchanged nervous glances, sensing the subtle hostility beneath our polite exchange. Daniel chuckled softly, stepping toward me, lowering his voice just enough for dramatic effect. "You know, Vincent, I grew up watching you," he said quietly, his tone shifting suddenly into something more personal, "admiring your ruthless control, your calculated perfectionism. But eventually, even idols must fall." His words resonated deeply, striking a nerve. Was he hinting at something more than mere ambition, perhaps a personal reason for targeting me? I narrowed my eyes, reading carefully into the veiled implications of his words. "Careful," I warned softly, voice measured. "I've seen a lot of young prodigies over the years. Ambition unchecked often leads to self-destruction." Daniel's smile widened subtly, unfazed. "Funny. That's exactly what my father used to say. He admired you too, right up until you destroyed his career." Cold chill spread slowly down my spine, my pulse quickening at his deliberate revelation. Daniel turned away casually, returning to the attentive group behind him, seamlessly resuming his charismatic demeanor. The elevator doors slid open, and I stepped silently inside, tension gripping my shoulders. That night, alone in my dimly lit study, I couldn't shake Daniel's words from my mind. His admission about his father's ruined career was deliberate, a carefully planted seed intended to unsettle me. If Daniel was driven by revenge, his actions could prove dangerously unpredictable. I opened my laptop once again, hands unusually steady despite the storm brewing in my chest. Typing carefully, I began a deeper search. Daniel Hart family background, father controversy. If Daniel intended to weaponize the past against me, I'd ensure he was confronted with his own hidden vulnerabilities first. This was no longer a simple power struggle. It had become personal for both of us, and only one could emerge unscathed. Late that evening, my office was cloaked in darkness except for the pale glow from the architect's lamp above my desk. In front of me lay the carefully drawn blueprint labeled boldly as the Bridge of Fate, set to be the next heart-stopping centerpiece of Survival Quest. Every major design we created had to endure rigorous checks, a stringent approval process involving safety consultants, engineers, and senior producers. But after decades in this business, I knew exactly how to navigate around such scrutiny. Small, almost imperceptible flaws were my specialty, hidden vulnerabilities, concealed under layers of complexity, invisible even to the most diligent inspector. I picked up a pencil, tracing carefully over the structural elements of the bridge suspended above a seemingly bottomless canyon. Each delicate adjustment, an anchor slightly misplaced, a supporting cable subtly weakened, was meticulously calculated, creating weaknesses that would hold steady under brief testing but would ultimately fail under sustained pressure. I paused for a moment, recalling clearly Daniel's last response to a similar challenge. Just last season, he'd insisted on personally testing a high-wire obstacle, brushing off all safety concerns, his trademark arrogance in full display. "Come on, Vincent," he'd teased openly in front of the crew. "Risk makes ratings. Don't tell me you've forgotten that." His words still echoed clearly in my mind, reckless bravado masked by a confident grin. Daniel's ego wouldn't allow him to pass up this spectacular new stunt. He'd dive headlong into the spotlight once again, completely blind to the trap I'd set. As I finalized my changes, my phone buzzed quietly, breaking my concentration. It was a text from Jonathan Wells. "Just spoke with board. Pressure is high, ratings must climb. Daniel's ideas favored heavily. Need something groundbreaking from you soon. Vincent." I read the message twice, my jaw tightening with controlled irritation. The network's impatience only reinforced the necessity of my plan. It had become painfully clear removing Daniel was no longer just about pride. It was essential to preserve my authority and influence. Returning to the blueprint, I double-checked every alteration, reassuring myself of their invisibility to external scrutiny. My pulse slowed to a steady rhythm, calm settling over me like a familiar cloak, with practiced care. I rolled the design carefully and sealed it with a tight red ribbon, a discreet mark indicating readiness for submission tomorrow. But as I leaned back, satisfied, something tugged at the edge of my awareness, a vague unease nagging like an itch I couldn't quite reach. Frowning slightly, I quickly unrolled the blueprint once more, scanning closely over each section. It was then I noticed it a single tiny annotation I'd missed, initialed by one of the junior engineers who'd reviewed the preliminary sketches weeks ago. It was a simple comment scribbled lightly between a critical joint. One I'd just weakened intentionally. Review joint integrity closely high-risk area under prolonged tension. My chest tightened momentarily, an unfamiliar doubt flaring. How could I have overlooked this detail? Carefully erasing it now would be suspicious. Yet leaving it there posed its own risks. My mind raced quickly, assessing potential fallout scenarios. I realized suddenly, painfully clearly, that even the smallest oversight in this delicate dance could unravel everything I'd built. Breathing out slowly, I sat motionless, weighing my options. The battle I'd ignited had become even more treacherous than anticipated. One thing was certain. There was no turning back now. Early the next morning, the production site buzzed with quiet urgency as the crew assembled the daunting spectacle of survival quest, the Bridge of Fate. The structure loomed dramatically over the canyon, a powerful symbol of both human daring and calculated risk, demanding meticulous scrutiny from our safety consultants and engineers. Every challenge had always undergone rigorous safety checks, a three-tiered protocol including preliminary structural evaluations, rigorous stress tests, and final on-site approvals. Daniel, ever eager to claim center stage, had personally volunteered as the first contestant, publicly announcing that real directors never shy away from their own creations. His audacity was exactly the bait I needed. As I stood quietly observing the assembly, Evan, the chief safety engineer known for his cautious, detail-oriented approach, glanced repeatedly in my direction. There was hesitation in his movements, a subtle tension I recognized immediately, sensing something. I approached casually, maintaining an air of authoritative calm. "Everything all right, Evan?" I asked softly, with practiced ease. He hesitated slightly before speaking. "Just rechecking the tension at joint 3. It feels off. Could be my imagination, but it's bothering me." I gave a slow, reassuring smile, masking the brief spike of irritation inside me. "Evan, your thoroughness is commendable, but I reviewed it myself. Remember, Daniel specifically approved these specs. He trusts your team's work completely. No need to overthink." He opened his mouth to respond, but seemed to reconsider, offering a reluctant nod instead. Yet, as he turned away, I caught a fleeting shadow of doubt in his eyes, a look that stirred an unfamiliar discomfort within me. My pulse quickened briefly before settling back into its steady rhythm. Just then, my phone vibrated quietly, pulling my attention. It was a message from Jonathan Wells. "Vincent, just spoke with network execs. Pressure's escalating fast. Daniel's stunt needs to deliver big. Make sure everything goes perfectly. Failure is not an option." The words lingered heavily, a silent confirmation of stakes I knew all too well. Jonathan's message sharpened my resolve, reinforcing the necessity of the measures I was taking. Daniel's recent boldness openly challenging my decisions during the latest production meeting had undermined my authority enough. His reckless bravado, his audacious declarations that the old guard's cautious approach was holding the show back, still echoed bitterly in my mind. I forced my focus back to the bridge, reminding myself of the subtle precision embedded within its design. Each carefully disguised flaw had been placed deliberately, imperceptible under normal scrutiny, but devastating under sustained stress. Daniel's blind confidence would ensure he walked right into the trap willingly, without hesitation. By mid-afternoon, the crew finalized their checks, I watched closely, ensuring my presence subtly pressured them into brief, cursory inspections rather than extensive reviews. Finally, Evan approached again, holding out a clipboard. "Final tests complete, sir. All clear on our end," he reported quietly, though his tone lacked the usual confidence. I accepted the clipboard, giving him a firm, approving nod. "Excellent work. I appreciate your dedication." As Evan walked away, my eyes flickered briefly toward the bridge, savoring the calm before the storm. Everything had fallen precisely into place. Yet, as I scanned Evan's report casually, something caught my eye. A brief handwritten note scribbled hastily near the margin, almost unnoticed. "Joint 3 still feels questionable. Recommend secondary stress test before live run." I felt a sudden cold jolt of uncertainty ripple through me. How could I have overlooked Evan's persistent caution? The note wasn't official yet, but its presence alone signaled potential trouble. If Evan escalated his concerns, the whole scheme might unravel. My mind raced quickly, calculating various outcomes. Evan was cautious but loyal, yet loyalty could shift rapidly under moral pressure. If his doubts persisted, I'd have to act swiftly. Perhaps an unexpected transfer or subtle discrediting could neutralize his influence. I disliked the thought of taking such drastic measures against a promising employee, but survival dictated ruthless pragmatism. Hesitation, after all, was a luxury I couldn't afford. Clenching the clipboard tighter, I forced myself to breathe slowly, regaining control. The stakes had risen sharply, and Evan's vigilance had complicated my perfect plan. Still, I reminded myself coolly, this was precisely the game I'd chosen: high risk, high reward. I tucked the clipboard securely beneath my arm, walking steadily toward my office to carefully destroy Evan's troublesome note before anyone else noticed it. This subtle detail had changed the calculus slightly, but I remained confident. One thing was clear now more than ever from here forward. There would be no margin for error. The studio was electric, charged with an intensity that only came from live television. Powerful lights cast stark shadows across the carefully constructed set, illuminating every inch of the imposing structure known as the Bridge of Fate. Months of meticulous planning and multiple layers of stringent safety protocols, including comprehensive inspections, rigorous stress tests, and constant oversight by the network's senior safety committee, had finally culminated in this one decisive moment. Yet, beneath this flawless façade, my carefully placed sabotage waited patiently, hidden from even the sharpest scrutiny. Daniel Hart stood confidently at the bridge's entrance, his signature charismatic smile gleaming under the studio lights. He adjusted his safety harness nonchalantly, radiating the fearless bravado that had made him such a beloved figure to our audience. Then, with unmistakable intention, he looked directly across the studio at me, his eyes locking onto mine. His lips curled into a faint, knowing smirk as he called out, just loud enough for those nearby to overhear, "Watch closely. Vincent, maybe you'll finally learn how this show should really be done." His words resonated sharply, igniting an uncomfortable heat within me, around us. The crew laughed nervously, interpreting his remark as playful teasing. But Daniel's gaze remained challenging, daring me openly in front of everyone. I forced myself to smile calmly, masking the bitter satisfaction boiling beneath the surface, across the set. Evan stood quietly near the technical area, clipboard held rigidly at his side. I watched discreetly as he cast uneasy glances towards the bridge, and then toward Jonathan Wells, who stood near the control booth, observing the proceedings with narrowed, suspicious eyes. Jonathan's expression carried a guarded tension I hadn't seen before, a subtle but unsettling warning sign. Evan hesitated, then began slowly walking towards Jonathan, a move that tightened my chest momentarily. A flash of worry crossed my mind, but I suppressed it swiftly. There was nothing Evan could definitively prove now, and Jonathan's doubt would require concrete evidence to manifest into real trouble. Nevertheless, a faint unease lingered. Ignoring these distractions, I returned my focus to Daniel as he took his first steps onto the bridge, boldly addressing the live audience through his headset. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is why we watch Survival Quest. True courage is confronting uncertainty head-on." The crowd erupted into thunderous applause, cheering his bravery, oblivious to the engineered dangers beneath his feet. Daniel moved forward, with deliberate, confident steps, reaching the halfway mark where the hidden weakness awaited. The audience's breath caught collectively, their excitement palpable. Suddenly, from the corner of my eye, I glimpsed Evan quietly slipping away from the technical station, moving discreetly toward the staging area beneath the bridge. My pulse quickened with alarm as I watched him carefully kneel beside one of the crucial anchor points, pulling out a small flashlight to quickly inspect something beneath the structure. My heart hammered in sudden anxiety. If Evan spotted even a slight anomaly now, my entire plan could collapse instantly. Daniel paused briefly, as if sensing something amiss, but quickly shook it off, smiling confidently to reassure the audience. The bridge emitted a faint, unsettling creak, subtle yet ominous, audible clearly through the live broadcast. Evan's flashlight flickered nervously beneath the bridge, illuminating the steel joints one by one. Standing perfectly still, I clenched my fists discreetly, willing Evan to overlook what I'd so painstakingly concealed. The studio audience leaned forward in tense anticipation, unaware that beneath their excitement lay a razor-thin line between triumph and disaster. In that fragile moment, I realized with absolute clarity everything I'd worked for, every ruthless decision I'd made, now rested entirely in Evan's uncertain hands. The studio erupted into chaos as the sharp, metallic snap reverberated ominously throughout the set. The bridge of fate, meticulously constructed and exhaustively safety-tested, suddenly tilted downward at a terrifying angle. Daniel, previously poised and self-assured, was now hanging desperately from the railing, his fingers slipping dangerously. "Vincent!" he screamed, eyes wide and frantic, a raw, haunting desperation breaking through his typically confident demeanor. "Do something. Help me." For a fleeting, chilling instant, his terrified gaze locked onto mine. In that moment, all pretense vanished. Daniel recognized something in my eyes, something colder, something calculated. A flash of horrified realization rippled across his features. Then his attention broke away, consumed entirely by survival as the structure beneath him continued to collapse. Around us, the live audience screamed in panic, the terrifying scene playing out in real time on screens nationwide. Production crew members rushed forward, yelling frantic commands, attempting to deploy emergency nets and rescue equipment. My voice rose sharply over the pandemonium, projecting urgency and authority. "Emergency crew, get Daniel down immediately." Yet beneath my carefully orchestrated panic, I felt a surge of cold satisfaction. This moment, terrible as it was, signaled my absolute victory over Daniel. Still, I knew well that the consequences would be severe. Already I could envision the headlines, the scandal, and the network executives' panic over Survival Quest's reputation being irrevocably damaged. A serious safety failure in a flagship live broadcast meant rigorous investigations, potentially jeopardizing our future, my future. At the edge of the chaos, I noticed Jonathan Wells stepping swiftly toward one of his senior production colleagues, leaning in closely to whisper something brief and sharp. The colleague's eyes widened abruptly, shooting a furtive, uneasy glance in my direction. My pulse quickened slightly, recognizing the subtle signs of suspicion being quietly exchanged. Below, Daniel clung desperately to the bridge, paramedics rapidly maneuvering a rescue harness into place beneath him. With every passing second, the situation intensified. The audience watched breathlessly, many covering their mouths in horror as Daniel continued pleading hoarsely, his voice trembling with raw fear. "Hurry! Please, I can't hold on. Finally!" The harness secured him, and he was lowered shakily onto solid ground amid deafening applause of relief. Yet, my attention quickly shifted toward Evan. I caught sight of him, withdrawn from the crowd, rapidly dialing his phone. Urgency etched across his face. My stomach tightened sharply with dread. I knew exactly whom he was contacting, the network safety board. Before I could fully process Evan's action, Jonathan approached decisively, his face composed yet noticeably tense. "Vincent," he said in a controlled and neutral voice, placing a firm hand on my shoulder, guiding me away from the cameras and commotion. "We need to speak privately now." His tone sent an unmistakable chill down my spine. I followed him quietly, the triumphant satisfaction I'd briefly felt now curdling sharply into uncertainty. As we moved away from the chaos toward a quiet corridor, my mind raced urgently, preparing explanations, alibis, contingencies. My thoughts darkened further as I considered Evan. If his suspicion persisted and he chose to escalate this further, I would have no choice but to discredit him swiftly and completely. I disliked resorting to such ruthless methods, especially against someone who'd always been dedicated. But survival required sacrifices. As for Jonathan, careful maneuvering would be necessary. His influence could either shield me or bury me, depending entirely on how convincingly I played my hand. I realized, bitterly, that despite the apparent perfection of my plan, the slightest suspicion now threatened to unravel everything I had carefully built. 6 months had passed since Daniel's devastating fall from the bridge of fate. He survived barely, but the injuries had left him permanently confined to a wheelchair. His career abruptly shattered, and his days of captivating audiences forever behind him. The incident had triggered a massive internal investigation within the network, the scale and intensity of which had been unprecedented. Yet, despite weeks of rigorous scrutiny, interrogations, and careful forensic examinations, the official verdict had ultimately absolved me of any wrongdoing. My meticulously constructed narrative had remained unbreakable, my reputation still immaculate. Tonight marked yet another extravagant gala celebrating Survival Quest's continuing dominance in television ratings, ironically propelled even higher by public fascination with Daniel's tragedy. The lavish ballroom, overflowing with influential industry figures and shimmering beneath golden chandeliers, reflected my restored power. I stood confidently in my private office adjacent to the grand event, savoring a rare moment of solitary triumph. Suddenly, the discreet chime of the office door drew my attention. A courier, clearly uncomfortable interrupting the event, hurriedly placed a sealed envelope and a USB drive onto my polished desk before vanishing back into the crowd. Curiosity swiftly gave way to unease as I opened the envelope. Inside was a single typed line, blunt and unmistakable. "I know what you did. Watch the video." An icy wave of dread surged through my veins as I quickly inserted the USB into my laptop, heart racing with apprehension. The screen flickered briefly before displaying grainy yet devastatingly clear footage me, alone and unmistakably identifiable, sabotaging the bridge's supports in calculated, careful silence. Panic gripped me for the first time in years, sharp, overwhelming panic. My breathing quickened, the carefully maintained mask of control cracking under the enormity of what I was seeing. Who could have captured this footage? My mind immediately settled on Laura, Daniel's fiercely loyal assistant, who had mysteriously resigned shortly after his accident. I recalled vividly the intensity of her grief and the lingering suspicion in her eyes whenever she watched me during the investigation. One particular memory surfaced vividly: Laura, standing quietly on the edge of the studio, her eyes sharply tracking my every move on set. Notebook held close to her chest, as if meticulously documenting each subtle gesture. Suddenly, a gentle knock interrupted my spiraling thoughts. Sophie, a young production assistant, peeked hesitantly into my office. "Mr. Reed, sorry to bother you, but some staff mentioned Laura today," she said, voice uncertain. "Apparently she's been in touch, asking questions about the show's safety protocols. Thought you should know." My pulse surged with renewed alarm. This indirect confirmation erased any lingering doubt. Laura was indeed behind this threat. Her approach had been patient, deliberate, and clearly driven by a desire for revenge, methodically plotting my downfall from the shadows. The implications chilled me further. If she'd sent this video to me, who else might already have received a copy? Taking a deep, steadying breath, I quickly grabbed my phone. Navigating swiftly to Laura's number, my thoughts raced, formulating a strategy even as I tapped call. I knew confronting Laura head-on required precise control. I'd need to gauge exactly what she knew, what leverage she thought she had, and if necessary, what price she would accept for her silence. The phone rang once, twice, then connected, but there was no greeting, only silence punctuated by a faint, unsettling sound, the distinctive, subtle beep of a recording device starting in the background. The realization jolted me sharply. Laura was already a step ahead, prepared not just for this confrontation, but to trap me even deeper. I stood frozen for an instant, heart pounding violently as I considered the dangerous new stakes. The game had changed drastically. Spiraling beyond simple rivalry or revenge, it had become a desperate, high-stakes battle of survival. Now, more urgently than ever, I had to find a way to silence Laura permanently, before she succeeded in exposing everything. The following evening, I arranged to meet Laura at a secluded corner of the Hotel Regency's upscale lounge, discreet, elegant, and notably private. The soft hum of distant conversations mixed with gentle piano notes, masking the true intensity of our encounter. Laura was already there when I arrived, poised confidently in a corner booth, her dark eyes sharp and calculating, awaiting my approach. I took a seat opposite her, adjusting my posture to radiate calm authority. "Thank you for coming, Laura," I began smoothly. "I believe there's still room to handle this matter discreetly." Laura smiled faintly, a quiet, chilling expression. "You seem confident, Vincent, but there's nothing discreet about what you've done." The bluntness of her accusation struck sharply. I held her gaze firmly. Daniel's accident was tragic. I understand your anger, but what's done is done. Daniel survived. He's alive. Isn't it time to move forward? Laura's eyes flashed with quiet fury. Alive, she echoed bitterly. Yes, he's breathing, but his career is gone forever. Daniel now spends every day trapped in that wheelchair, replaying your betrayal. His dreams, his future, gone. All thanks to your sabotage. I paused, feigning concern. Laura, accusations like these are dangerous. If you're determined to press this further, I have resources to defend myself. Resources you simply can't match. She leaned forward calmly, unfazed by my subtle threat. Oh, I know about your resources, Vincent. But tell me, do you really think you're still holding all the cards? An uncomfortable chill crept along my spine. A memory suddenly flashed through my mind the night Laura resigned from the production. I'd seen her briefly lingering alone by the archive room, carefully concealing documents and files within her bag. At the time, I'd dismissed it as grief-driven sentimentality. Now, I realized she'd been meticulously gathering evidence even then. What exactly do you want, Laura? I asked cautiously, aware now that my leverage might be weaker than I'd believed. She considered me silently, savoring her advantage. I want justice. Vincent, real justice. But it's not just me you have to worry about. Her voice dropped to a whisper, eyes glittering with dangerous knowledge. Did you really think I'd risk everything to confront you alone? The moment I got that video, I placed it into safer, far more powerful hands. My pulse quickened. A sudden, unsettling suspicion emerged. Who else have you involved? I demanded, barely maintaining my composure. Laura offered a faint, knowing smile, leaning back slowly. Let's just say it's someone very influential, someone whose empire you've helped build, who'd hate to see their reputation stained, someone who values loyalty far more than you do. Instantly, a single name rose unbidden in my mind, Jonathan Wells. The thought sent a surge of dread through me. Jonathan was the network's quiet, ruthless kingmaker. He controlled far more than just survival quest. He held sway over entire careers, reputations, even lives. If Jonathan had the evidence, my downfall was assured. Laura rose smoothly from her seat, clearly satisfied she'd delivered her message. I warned you, Vincent, she said softly, eyes glinting coldly. This is much bigger than you and me. Perhaps it's time you realized how little power you truly have left. I watched silently as she walked confidently out of the lounge, her every step filled with triumphant certainty. Alone at the table, I fought to regain control of my fraying nerves. Laura had outplayed me masterfully, and now the threat was clearer and far more dangerous than ever before. With a surge of urgency, I retrieved my phone and quickly opened a secured contact list, starting with Laura's former associates, known friends, anyone who might provide leverage. I needed information, any weakness, any angle to regain control. If Jonathan Wells truly held the video, I needed proof of his involvement immediately. My fingers hovered briefly over the first name, preparing myself mentally for the delicate, dangerous investigation that now awaited me. For the first time, my power felt dangerously fragile, balanced on a knife edge. One wrong move could plunge me into ruin. The time for complacency had ended. The real battle for survival had just begun. The following afternoon, I arranged to meet Laura privately in my executive office, a room carefully designed to radiate power, authority, and subtle intimidation. Behind me, the expansive city skyline stretched endlessly, a perfect backdrop emphasizing my position at the peak of my career. But beneath this carefully constructed facade, uncertainty gnawed relentlessly at my nerves. Jonathan Wells's shadow loomed larger than ever, a ruthless figure who'd spent years quietly consolidating his power within the network, patiently waiting for an opportunity to displace me. I remembered vividly the early days when Jonathan and I were both rising stars, fierce rivals climbing parallel ladders. Years ago, I'd bested him for the director's seat of Survival Quest, something he had never truly forgiven. Even after attaining a powerful executive role overseeing several top-rated programs. Now, it seemed, Jonathan had finally found his moment to settle that old score. Laura arrived punctually, poised and composed as ever. She sat calmly, her gaze briefly scanning the luxurious surroundings with mild curiosity before settling back on me. "I'm surprised, Vincent," she remarked softly. "Another attempt at negotiation." I smiled gently, forcing confidence. "I believe you understand the value of discretion." "Laura, your career prospects could improve dramatically if we cooperate instead of antagonizing each other." She hesitated. Considering my words carefully, I pressed forward, sensing a potential opening. "Executive producer, unlimited resources, a major creative voice, your career trajectory would skyrocket overnight. Let's end this quietly and profitably." Laura's dark eyes narrowed thoughtfully, clearly intrigued yet guarded. For a fleeting moment, I thought I saw something else flicker behind her carefully maintained facade, a flash of independent determination, suggesting she had personal plans extending beyond mere revenge. A sudden chill crept down my spine. Perhaps Laura wasn't just Jonathan's pawn. Maybe she had her own hidden agenda. Finally, she spoke quietly. "Your offer is tempting, Vincent, I'll admit. But you have no idea how complicated things truly are." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed urgently on the desk. Glancing quickly at the message preview, my heart dropped sharply. "Heads up, Jonathan's been spotted meeting privately with senior network executives all week. Looks serious. Watch your back." A cold wave of dread swept over me. Jonathan's moves had already begun. He wasn't just maneuvering against me. He was positioning himself to reshape the entire power structure. Laura noticed my distraction, a faint smile curving her lips knowingly. In that instant, I realized the depth of Jonathan's strategy. Laura was not simply a means to his end, she was a willing partner, equally dangerous, playing her own game beneath his larger shadow. She stood gracefully, preparing to leave. "I'll consider your proposal, Vincent," she said ambiguously, eyes glittering sharply. "But remember, I'm not the only one you need to convince." As the door closed softly behind her, I sank slowly into my chair, mind racing furiously through potential responses. Jonathan's game had escalated dramatically, forcing me into uncharted territory. My thoughts sharpened rapidly, outlining desperate strategies and ruthless countermeasures. First, I needed leverage, something substantial enough to neutralize Jonathan's rapidly growing influence. I considered the internal rivalries within the network's board of directors. Perhaps aligning myself secretly with one of Jonathan's opponents could create cracks in his carefully constructed alliance. If I could subtly expose misconduct, errors, or unethical decisions under Jonathan's oversight, It might weaken his support enough to buy me critical time. Alternatively, I could take an even riskier path, orchestrating a direct confrontation, bringing hidden conflicts into the open, gambling everything on my ability to outmaneuver him in a public power struggle. But that approach carried enormous risks. One miscalculation, and I'd lose everything. My phone vibrated again, abruptly interrupting my planning. Another message, this time directly from Jonathan Wells himself. "Vincent, we should talk. Privately. Soon." My pulse surged sharply, adrenaline mingling with cold fear. Jonathan reaching out directly meant he believed himself firmly in control. He thought he had already won or was about to. I needed allies, urgently, before facing him, quickly. I scrolled through my contacts, stopping at Evan, the young engineer whose integrity and suspicion of the original incident might now prove useful. Evan had been overlooked by Jonathan, seen as insignificant, but perhaps precisely because of that, he could provide the unexpected leverage I desperately needed. Taking a deep breath, I dialed Evan's number decisively, preparing myself to navigate yet another dangerous alliance. My once secure empire now balanced precariously, threatened from multiple angles. Every move I made now would determine not just my career, but possibly my very survival. This was no longer just a strategic rivalry. It was an all-out war for dominance, and defeat was simply not an option. I chose the rooftop restaurant for our meeting deliberately, its elevated luxury reflecting precisely the precarious heights from which I could now fall. The city's skyline glowed softly beneath us, oblivious to the silent yet ruthless battle for dominance taking place above. Jonathan Wells arrived at exactly 7, punctual as always, exuding calm power as he took his seat opposite me, eyes sharp with anticipation. For a brief, tense moment, we sat silently, sizing each other up. Our rivalry had always simmered just beneath the surface, rooted deeply in a past neither of us had ever truly forgotten. I recalled vividly the day nearly a decade ago, when both Jonathan and I had vied for the same directorial role. Survival Quest had been his brainchild as much as mine. Yet, in that decisive board meeting, I'd outmaneuvered him, presenting my vision more persuasively, effectively relegating Jonathan to a supporting role. That moment had sparked a resentment he'd nursed patiently, methodically. Ever since. Jonathan broke the silence first, voice smooth, precise. "Funny, isn't it? After all these years, here we are again, Vincent. Only this time, you don't have the upper hand." "Jonathan," I began cautiously, steadying my voice, "I know about your meetings with the board, but sabotaging the entire network just to settle an old score, is this really the legacy you want?" He leaned forward slightly, his expression hardening. "You think this is just about you? No, Vincent. This is about restoring control, true leadership. You've always prioritized your own survival over the network. Someone had to step in." My jaw tightened. "By manipulating Laura, turning Evan against me, this is leadership." Jonathan's gaze darkened. "You never understood loyalty, Vincent. Evan didn't betray you willingly. I merely reminded him of certain obligations, family, debts, vulnerabilities. He chose wisely, under pressure, admittedly, but wisely nonetheless." A sickening realization surged through me. Evan hadn't simply betrayed me. He'd been forced into compliance, manipulated by Jonathan's ruthless coercion. Guilt and anger twisted sharply within me, intensifying my determination to push back. You've underestimated me before. Jonathan, I said quietly. Don't repeat that mistake. There's still time to stop this from becoming a public battle. Jonathan chuckled coldly, dismissively. Your confidence is admirable, if misguided. The board's meeting Friday to decide your fate. I suggest you start preparing an exit speech. As if on cue, my phone vibrated sharply. A brief, anxious glance at the screen revealed a text from Sophie, my assistant. Board meeting moved up urgent. Tomorrow morning. Jonathan arranged it. The message sent an icy chill down my spine, heightening my anxiety. Jonathan watched me intently, clearly aware of what I'd just seen. You seem distracted. Vincent. Bad news. I struggled to maintain composure. You planned this carefully, didn't you? Jonathan's expression softened into a cruel, satisfied smile. Every detail. Vincent. From the timing of Daniel's accident, Laura's involvement, Evan's reluctant cooperation, all carefully orchestrated. Frankly, your downfall was inevitable. Desperation gripped me, forcing my mind into overdrive. But as I stared at Jonathan, his assured confidence bordering on arrogance, I suddenly recognized something crucial. His overwhelming desire for control was also his greatest vulnerability. Jonathan couldn't tolerate unpredictability or chaos. Everything needed to fit neatly within his meticulous plan. If I introduced an element he couldn't anticipate, exploited the very perfection of his schemes, it might create the fracture I desperately needed. Gathering my composure, I stood slowly, meeting his gaze directly. You know what your problem is, Jonathan. You've always believed you can control everything, every detail, every person. But perfection makes you fragile. And now, you've shown me exactly where you'll break. For the first time, Jonathan's confidence flickered uncertainly, his eyes narrowing slightly in guarded suspicion. Careful, Vincent. Threats from a weakened position rarely end well. I offered him a thin, defiant smile. We'll see. Leaving him seated alone at the table, I moved swiftly toward the elevator, adrenaline surging. I'd finally glimpsed Jonathan's Achilles heel, his obsession with total control. If I could disrupt just one element of his carefully balanced plan, I might still reverse my impending downfall. Time was now against me, but determination burned fiercely within me. Jonathan Wells had planned meticulously, but even the most flawless strategies could unravel spectacularly when pushed just beyond their limit. The clock on my office wall ticked mercilessly forward, echoing the relentless pressure as dawn approached. My desk was cluttered with hastily assembled notes, strategies, and desperate contingencies. Jonathan had meticulously built a web designed not just for revenge, but for personal gain. A recent, discreetly forwarded financial report from Sophie had made it crystal clear. Jonathan had privately positioned himself to profit immensely if he successfully took control of the network. His obsession with perfection was not merely ego-driven, it was strategically aligned with his hidden financial interests. Evan's betrayal had felt deeply personal at first, but as I considered the frantic desperation in his voice during our recent conversation, I understood his weakness clearly. Jonathan had manipulated Evan through crushing financial pressure, exploiting his significant debts and family obligations. Evan wasn't a traitor by choice. He was simply vulnerable and easy target. There was no time left for hesitation. I called Sophie again, noting the tension in her usually calm voice as she answered. Sophie had been by my side for nearly a decade, loyalty solidified by countless shared crises. Early in her career, I'd shielded her from blame after a critical production mistake, quietly saving her job. Ever since, she'd been fiercely protective, often at her own risk. "Sophie," I said quietly, "how quickly can Elias and Rebecca move? They're already prepared." She replied immediately, determination clear despite underlying anxiety. "Elias has gathered documents confirming procedural violations Jonathan committed during recent board dealings. Rebecca's ready with internal messages highlighting Jonathan's bullying management style subtle enough to seem organic." "Excellent," I said firmly. "Tell Elias to challenge Jonathan's legitimacy publicly during the meeting. Rebecca must ensure board members see those messages simultaneously, creating uncertainty right when Jonathan expects total order." A brief pause hung heavily between us before Sophie spoke again. "Vincent, you realize this is extremely risky if Jonathan anticipates any of this." "I'm aware," I interrupted gently, knowing her worry came from genuine loyalty. "But Jonathan's vulnerability is chaos. He can't function when faced with uncertainty. If we shatter his careful facade publicly, the board will abandon him." Before Sophie could respond, my phone vibrated sharply. I glanced down, tension gripping my chest. A private text appeared from Elias. "Rumors already circulating among the board. Some are nervous, sensing something's off about Jonathan's urgency. Whatever you plan, it better happen fast." Adrenaline surged through me. "It's begun already," I told Sophie quickly. "Rumors of Jonathan's instability are reaching the board. Move immediately, leak Evans' recordings of Jonathan's bribery directly to the media. Scandal is our strongest weapon. Let it explode before Jonathan can contain it." Sophie hesitated briefly, understanding the magnitude of this decision. "Understood. I'll handle it personally." As she ended the call, I felt the crushing weight of my gamble settle on my shoulders. The plan was ruthless, but necessary. By leaking evidence of Jonathan's corruption to the press mere hours before the board meeting, I'd ensure he entered the room already compromised, forced onto the defensive, stripped of control. If Jonathan's meticulously crafted image cracked publicly, board members fearing for their own reputations would quickly distance themselves, collapsing his carefully arranged power structure. My phone lit up suddenly, interrupting my thoughts. My heart sank seeing Jonathan's private number flashing coldly across the screen. Reluctantly, I opened the message, "You've crossed a line, Vincent. You think this childish stunt will save you. Prepare for consequences beyond your imagination." Despite his words' chilling intent, I felt an unexpected surge of grim satisfaction. Jonathan's immediate reaction betrayed genuine panic beneath his carefully maintained facade. His obsession with control and predictability was cracking exactly as I had intended. Another buzz interrupted, this time from Sophie. "It's done. Evidence and recordings sent to major news outlets. The story is breaking publicly within minutes." I exhaled sharply, steadying myself as dawn's early glow touched the horizon. The countdown had begun, irrevocably shifting the dynamics of our power struggle. By forcing Jonathan's corruption into the harsh, unrelenting spotlight of public scrutiny, I'd created the chaos he dreaded most. Yet, I knew clearly how dangerous my position now was. Jonathan cornered would fight ferociously, unpredictably. Still, the die was cast. Either I'd emerge victorious, reclaiming my position and reputation by dismantling Jonathan's intricate conspiracy, or I'd fall spectacularly dragged down by the storm I'd deliberately unleashed. Gathering myself, I straightened, embracing the raw risk and undeniable thrill of finally confronting Jonathan openly. The upcoming board meeting was no longer about simply surviving. It was about ending this war definitively, even if the cost was higher than I'd ever anticipated. The boardroom felt like a courtroom on Judgment Day. The atmosphere unbearably heavy with the weight of careers, reputations, and legacies teetering on the brink of ruin. The massive windows framed the city skyline, ironically serene, indifferent to the storm of scandal raging inside. As I stepped in, the whispers ceased abruptly, every eye silently accusing or evaluating me. Jonathan stood confidently at the far end of the vast mahogany table, impeccably dressed, his calm demeanor betraying only a hint of tension beneath. The chairman adjusted his glasses nervously, breaking the tense silence. In light of today's troubling news and serious allegations, we must clarify matters swiftly. Jonathan cleared his throat sharply, voice unwavering but edged with subtle menace. Indeed, it's time we confront this mess directly. The damage from Daniel Hart's accident continues to affect our network deeply. Ratings initially spiked, yes, but advertisers have become wary, and public trust is eroding. This reckless game of sabotage and scandal orchestrated by Vincent threatens all we've built. The chairman hesitated. Jonathan, these are serious allegations. Jonathan smoothly interjected, holding up a small recording device. You needn't trust my word alone. Unfortunately, I have undeniable proof of Vincent's guilt. My chest tightened as Jonathan pressed play. My voice echoed hauntingly through the boardroom, detailing the plan that led directly to Daniel's catastrophic injury. As the recording played, I caught Jonathan's gaze, recognizing the triumphant gleam. This was his masterstroke, planned meticulously to destroy me. In that moment, a bitter memory surged to the surface, clarifying Jonathan's motives years earlier, during our fierce competition for creative control of the network. I'd publicly bested him, securing a critical executive position he desperately coveted. From that moment, he had quietly bided his time, collecting leverage to reclaim the power and respect he believed I'd stolen from him. The recording ended, leaving only stunned silence in its wake. Jonathan straightened calmly, seizing the advantage. As you can see, Vincent manipulated events, hoping Daniel's accident would eliminate professional threats to his power. A heavy silence fell over the room, eyes narrowing, expressions darkening toward me. But before the room could erupt in condemnation, Sophie suddenly rose from her seat, voice trembling but determined. Wait. Please, are we certain this recording hasn't been manipulated? Vincent would never… Jonathan cut her off coldly. Sophie, loyalty is admirable but misplaced here. The evidence has already been verified. Elias, visibly distressed, interjected cautiously. Have we independently confirmed this recording's authenticity? Jonathan shot him an icy glance, irritation briefly flickering across his composed façade. Of course. The technical team validated it thoroughly. There's no doubt. Despite his confident tone, Elias's question had planted a tiny seed of doubt among the members, who shifted uncomfortably, murmuring softly. Jonathan, sensing the hesitation, pressed harder. Let me remind you all, Vincent's reckless actions directly harmed Daniel Hart, severely damaged our credibility, and placed our financial stability at risk. My motivations have always been transparent. I seek only the stability and profitability of this network. Unlike Vincent, whose reckless pursuit of power has repeatedly endangered our collective interests. His words, carefully chosen, resonated clearly, Jonathan's personal ambitions were cleverly disguised as corporate necessity, yet unmistakably driven by his obsession with finally eclipsing me completely, feeling my position slipping dangerously. I rose to speak, voice carefully measured yet strained with urgency. "You're being manipulated. Jonathan's accusations are crafted precisely to mask his own corruption now exposed to the media." Jonathan smiled coldly, his composure impenetrable. "Desperation suits you poorly, Vincent." The chairman raised a hand sharply, silencing the exchange. "We've heard enough. This board will deliberate privately to determine the necessary course of action." I sank slowly back into my seat, dread gripping me as members stood and silently exited, leaving me alone in the oppressive silence. Only Sophie remained briefly, her eyes filled with anxious compassion. "Vincent," she whispered, "we're not done yet." But as she left, my phone buzzed urgently. A news alert flashed across the screen. Public outrage explodes over leaked recording implicating renowned director Vincent Reed in horrific sabotage. My heart sank. Public opinion was turning decisively against me, propelled by Jonathan's ruthless narrative. I closed my eyes briefly, forcing back despair. Yet even at this darkest moment, my mind raced frantically for a lifeline, a last desperate possibility to reclaim my position. Then it struck me. Sharply and suddenly, Jonathan's recording relied heavily on Evan's cooperation, a pressured witness who now felt deep remorse. If Evan publicly recanted, testifying he'd been coerced, Jonathan's evidence would crumble instantly. It was dangerous, risky, but possibly my only hope left. Breathing deeply, I opened my eyes, determination returning. Sophie's words echoed fiercely within me. "We're not done yet." No, not yet. Darkness had fully enveloped the city when I finally made my move, slipping quietly out of my office, away from the oppressive echoes of the disastrous boardroom confrontation. A chilly rain fell steadily, casting a muted, gloomy sheen over everything, perfectly reflecting my grim desperation. I dialed Evan's number, fingers trembling slightly from tension. After 3 agonizing rings, Evan answered, his voice barely audible, fearful. "Vincent, this isn't safe. Jonathan knows everything. He'll..." "Listen to me, Evan," I cut in firmly, desperation sharpening my voice into steel. "I understand your fear. Jonathan is ruthless. I know. But he's also vulnerable right now, far more than he's letting on. Vincent, you don't understand," Evan pleaded weakly. "He threatened my family. He knows my debts. He can ruin me, destroy me." A surge of compassion rose within me, mixed with a sharp sense of urgency. "Evan, I know what it's like to be cornered. I know exactly how you feel. But if you let him use your fear against you, you'll never be free again. If Jonathan wins now, he'll own you forever." Silence stretched across the line, interrupted only by Evan's shaky breathing. Carefully, I pressed forward, my tone softer, more understanding. "You never wanted any of this. You never wanted Daniel hurt. I know the guilt is eating you alive. I feel it too. Every single day. This is your chance. Evan, you can make it right. Help me expose Jonathan, and we can end this together." His breath hitched sharply, voice strained with emotion. "You really think there's still time?" "Yes," I replied decisively, voice steady. Jonathan's entire position now depends on your recorded testimony. If you publicly recant, explaining how he pressured you, Jonathan's credibility collapses. It's risky. I won't lie. But it's also our last real chance. For a painful moment, Evan hesitated, tormented by inner turmoil. How do I know this will protect my family? I can't risk them. Vincent. I paused carefully, heart pounding. Evan, I promise you, I'll personally ensure your family's safety. Jonathan thrives on fear. But if we take the fight public, he loses his power to harm you. He can't control everyone. The network can't afford another scandal targeting an innocent family. You'll have allies. Finally, after what felt like a lifetime, Evan's voice broke with a mixture of anguish and relief. All right, I'll do it. I'll recant publicly. Jonathan manipulated me. But Vincent, you have to promise you'll protect my family, no matter what happens to me. You have my word, I assured him firmly. We'll do this immediately. Before Jonathan anticipates our move, I'll arrange a press conference first thing tomorrow morning. Be ready. I ended the call. Relief flooding briefly through me, quickly replaced by renewed anxiety as my phone buzzed sharply again. I glanced down, blood running cold when Laura's name flashed across the screen. Reluctantly, I answered, steeling myself for whatever new threat awaited. Laura, now isn't the time. Oh, I disagree. Her voice cut in smoothly, dangerously composed. Your conversation with Evan was quite enlightening. My pulse quickened dangerously. How did you— Jonathan isn't the only one who plans meticulously, she interrupted coldly. You made a mistake thinking you could maneuver this behind my back. Evan won't be making any statements. He's already been dealt with. Panic surged violently through me, dread freezing my thoughts. What have you done? Laura's tone was chillingly calm. Relax. He's unharmed for now. But if you proceed, if Evan even attempts to recant, I'll make sure he never sees his family again. Is your ambition worth risking an innocent man's life? I struggled desperately to maintain control, thoughts racing frantically for a response. Laura, listen carefully. Jonathan will betray you, just as he betrayed everyone else. You're disposable to him. Don't let him use you to— I'm not Jonathan's puppet, Laura interjected fiercely, a hint of genuine anger creeping into her tone. I have my own interests, but right now, those interests align with his. You lost the moment you sabotaged Daniel. You deserve every consequence that follows. She ended the call abruptly, leaving me gripping the phone in numb disbelief, heart racing dangerously. Laura's threat had plunged my carefully planned last-ditch effort into chaos. Evan, the key to exposing Jonathan's manipulations, now stood perilously compromised. Yet even in this darkness, a desperate clarity formed. Laura's own anger had betrayed something crucial. She claimed independence from Jonathan, hinted at interests that diverged from his. If I could identify and exploit that fracture quickly enough, I might yet turn the situation around. Time was against me, and risk had become my constant companion. But surrender wasn't an option. Jonathan believed he'd secured victory, but the web he'd woven was unraveling from multiple angles. Laura, driven by her own hidden motives, might unknowingly provide the leverage I desperately needed. Taking a deep, steadying breath, I forced myself into motion, heart pounding fiercely with adrenaline. If Evan was in danger, I'd have to act swiftly, decisively. The press conference was no longer sufficient. I needed direct, undeniable evidence against Jonathan and Laura immediately. And for that, I'd have to do something even more reckless. Even more dangerous, I'd confront Jonathan face to face, expose Laura's hidden agenda, and risk everything on one final, desperate gamble. It was madness, pure, unfiltered desperation. But desperation had already become my reality. And in that realization, I found a strange, unsettling courage. Jonathan and Laura believed they had cornered me completely, yet in their arrogance, they might have handed me the final weapon needed to destroy them both. I grabbed my keys, heart thundering with urgency. The city outside waited, drenched in darkness and uncertainty, but within that darkness lay one final, flickering chance at redemption. The endgame had arrived, and I was ready to gamble it all. The scandal erupted like a tidal wave, swiftly eroding every remaining support I had. The recordings Jonathan leaked online revealed every chilling detail of my role in Daniel's tragic accident. Details even I had forgotten existed. The media, the public, and the entire network turned their full fury against me overnight. Headlines branded me a ruthless manipulator, a monstrous figure whose ambition had destroyed a promising young director's career. My phone, once a constant hum of messages and calls from allies, had fallen utterly silent. Sophie, whose loyalty had seemed unshakable, sent one final message before her resignation. Just 4 painful words: "I can't defend this." Even Elias and Rebecca quietly distanced themselves, overwhelmed by public outrage and intense pressure from the board. The loneliness I now felt was absolute, crushing me beneath its suffocating weight. In sheer desperation, I reached out to Evan one final time, meeting him secretly beneath the shadows of a dimly lit parking garage. Rain poured relentlessly, mirroring my own internal turmoil. Evan emerged cautiously, eyes hollow, face pale with fear. "Vincent, this is madness," he whispered, voice cracking. "I told you, I can't help you. Jonathan made sure of that. Please, Evan," I pleaded softly, my pride stripped completely away. "You're my last chance. Just publicly state that Jonathan coerced your testimony. You can stop all of this." Evan shook his head violently, eyes wide, panic evident. "He has people watching my family right now. I made my choice once already. I won't endanger them again, certainly not for you." He turned and quickly disappeared back into the shadows, leaving me standing utterly alone beneath the harsh flicker of the fluorescent lights. The final door had closed, and with it went any lingering hope I desperately clung to. Returning to my now empty office, I stared at the darkened city skyline beyond the window. Reflections of my past successes mocked me bitterly, each achievement now meaningless, overshadowed by the catastrophic consequences of my actions. On my desk, news articles and social media posts piled up, all calling relentlessly for my arrest, my prosecution, my complete ruin. A sudden notification caught my eye. A new interview had just aired, Daniel Hart speaking publicly for the first time since his accident. I clicked the link, heart sinking as Daniel's image filled the screen. Confined to a wheelchair, his once vibrant and confident demeanor replaced by a weary, broken man. "Vincent Reed ruined my life," Daniel stated calmly, the quiet intensity in his voice cutting deeper than any furious accusation could. "But what hurts most isn't the injury. It's knowing that my trust was betrayed by someone I admired. Vincent's ambition destroyed more than my career. It shattered my belief in integrity itself." The weight of his words crushed me, I'd never intended for the damage to run this deep to strip away Daniel's dignity and faith so completely. Yet intention no longer mattered. The results were irreversible. Laura soon faced similar public backlash. Although she had turned against Jonathan, her credibility had been irreparably damaged. In a bitter final interview, she admitted, "I was blinded by ambition and loyalty to the wrong people. Vincent and Jonathan manipulated all of us. Now, none of us will ever escape the consequences." Jonathan, too, began feeling the strain as his intricate web of manipulation slowly unraveled. Public outrage spread, shifting focus toward his own questionable methods and hidden motives. But even if Jonathan faced consequences eventually, it offered no consolation, no redemption for me. Days blurred together, overshadowed by isolation, regret, and overwhelming bitterness. Rumors of impending criminal charges haunted me relentlessly. Each morning, the fear grew stronger. It wasn't if I'd be held accountable, but when. I knew this would be the end of everything I'd built: my power, my wealth, my identity. Late one evening, unable to endure the crushing isolation any longer, I found myself wandering aimlessly through the empty television studio, the site of countless victories, now reduced to a shadowy monument of my failure. Pausing near the exact spot where Daniel had fallen, I stared into the silent darkness, haunted by the echoes of that fateful moment. In that stillness, the bitter truth crystallized painfully clear. My greatest mistake wasn't sabotaging Daniel's career. It was underestimating the devastating power of my own ambition. I sank to the cold studio floor, utterly alone, as the truth closed in mercilessly around me. This was my fate, stripped of everything, forced to live forever with the knowledge that I alone was responsible. There would be no redemption, no forgiveness, no escape, only the endless, unrelenting torment of knowing I had destroyed others and myself in a ruthless game of power. In the suffocating silence, one chilling realization took hold. The punishment for what I'd done wouldn't come from a court or the public. It was already here, rooted deeply within me, a lifelong prison of shame, regret, and unbearable solitude. The courtroom had never seemed colder, nor had it ever felt emptier, despite the crowded benches and countless cameras fixated upon me. I sat silently, numb to the judge's stern words echoing through the cavernous chamber: guilty, conspiracy, endangerment. Words I once believed could never touch me, now chained irrevocably to my name. As the sentence was read, the faces around me blurred into indistinct shapes. Yet one stood out sharply: Jonathan Wells, seated quietly at the back of the courtroom, his face hollow, devoid of triumph or satisfaction. His victory over me had delivered none of the lasting satisfaction he'd expected. He, too, had fallen victim to the flames of our mutual ambition. His own scandals, initially overshadowed by my spectacular downfall, soon resurfaced, tearing apart his carefully crafted image. By now, he was merely a ghost of the powerful man he had once been forced into retirement, stripped of the influence he desperately craved. Laura was nowhere to be seen, having vanished quietly from the industry. A disgraced figure whose ambition had reduced her to little more than an embarrassing footnote in the narrative. Her final public apology had been a hollow spectacle, condemned and swiftly forgotten, leaving her adrift in regret and shame. But none of their fates brought me solace. None relieved the crushing weight of guilt that settled permanently on my chest. Guilt sharpened into an unbearable ache whenever I closed my eyes and saw Daniel Hart's face staring back, accusingly and silently. My punishment wasn't the prison sentence or the endless condemnation from a public that once revered me. It was something far deeper, far more inescapable, an endless internal torment, born from the knowledge that I had destroyed the lives of others simply to maintain my own dominance. Months turned into years, and solitude became my only companion in the quiet confines of my cell. Here, stripped of my former identity, no wealth, no fame, no power, I finally confronted the bitter truth of my existence. The ruthless games I'd played, the strategies I'd prided myself upon, were now nothing but faded echoes of arrogance and folly. News eventually reached me of Daniel Hart. He had quietly left the public eye, forever altered by injuries that would never fully heal, yet somehow finding peace far removed from the toxic world I once ruled. His survival, his quiet resilience, was perhaps the only true victory in the entire saga one achieved, despite my cruelty rather than because of it. Night after night, in the oppressive silence of my confinement, I revisited every mistake, every miscalculation, every arrogant assumption I'd made. But none haunted me more than the stark realization of how gravely I'd underestimated Jonathan. That miscalculation had not merely ended my career, it had shattered every illusion I'd carefully built about myself. One rainy evening, while alone in my dimly lit cell, I received a rare visitor. Sophie stood on the other side of the thick, reinforced glass, her expression weary, sadness etched deeply in her eyes. "Vincent," she spoke softly into the receiver, "I just wanted you to know I don't hate you, but I'll never understand why you did it. Was it really worth everything you've lost?" Her gentle sincerity twisted like a knife inside me. I could only shake my head slowly, my voice barely above a whisper. "No, Sophie, it never was." But by the time I understood that, it was far too late. She nodded silently, tears glistening softly in her eyes. After a long pause, she quietly hung up, leaving me again to the suffocating quiet of my isolation. Returning to my bunk, I stared blankly at the ceiling, replaying her words endlessly, her simple questions searing deeply into my soul. Was it worth it? All that ruthless ambition, all those carefully orchestrated moves and manipulations, had any of it truly mattered in the end? My ambition had been my greatest strength, but it had also been my ultimate downfall. It blinded me, making me incapable of recognizing limits, unable to understand that winning at all costs eventually meant losing everything truly valuable. As I closed my eyes, enveloped once more by darkness, I finally surrendered fully to the truth that would haunt me forever in the game of ambition and power. The cruelest defeat is the one you inflict upon yourself. And that defeat, bitter and absolute, was mine to bear until the very end. Thank you all for watching this video. Please comment and let me know what you think about this story. Please like and subscribe to watch more great content on my channel.